We begin in Beijing with the Winter Olympics due to open later in the week. The United States and other nations are staging a diplomatic boycott of the event in protest at China's human rights record. While growing numbers of COVID-19 cases are also worrying athletes and officials, Beijing insists the Games will be safe.
Arrival at the airport in Beijing. Chinese workers in protective gear welcome the incoming Olympic teams and their baggage. Then it's a PCR test before a trip to the venues in the Olympic Village, where similar tests are to follow on a daily basis. Caution is the watchword. China's cross-country skiers are being shielded from foreign rivals, their Norwegian coach tells us.
With this team, we have been staying in China the full time for the past 2 years. So they have been extremely careful. We haven't actually competed internationally for 2 years.
Of the foreign athletes who have already arrived, 125 have tested positive for COVID-19 and have isolated. It's not clear whether they'll all get the negative test result they need in time to compete. The opening ceremony fireworks have been rehearsed, but critics say that China is using the pizzazz of the Games to distract from human rights abuses.
So the CCP's purpose is exactly to turn the sports arena into a stage for political legitimacy and a tool to whitewash all those atrocities.
But China itself boasts of its strength and promises a safe Winter Olympics in Beijing.
The plight of China's Uyghur community and their harsh repression looms large over the Winter Olympics. With opposition suppressed within China itself, many are making their voices heard elsewhere. Our Washington bureau chief Ines Pohl has met a Uyghur restaurant owner in Los Angeles whose father disappeared 3 years ago.
These mountains remind Bukra Akin very much of home. He left China 6 years ago to start a new life in the US. Everything seemed to go well until his father, who remained in China, was abruptly snatched from his home during the night of October 25th in 2018. His father owned one of the biggest Uyghur publishing firms, and Akin believes that his fight to protect the Uyghur language and culture was the reason why the Chinese government put him in prison. He and Akin were best friends. His father also supported him financially in the US.
My biggest fear, I really scared like he couldn't cuddle his grandchildren to just cuddle with me again. That's my biggest fear, to see him again. I wish US government and Europe, they can do more to pressure on China about the genocide.
After his father was detained, Bukra Akin opened a restaurant in the larger LA area. He named it Dolan's after the Uyghur region in eastern Xinjiang, where he grew up. One of the most popular dishes is lahman, a dish of hand-pulled noodles. The Uyghur kitchen reflects the far western area of China at the border of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where most of the region's 12 million Uyghurs live.
Surprisingly, not many people know about Uyghurs, even there's so many news on the media. So, like, I have to attract them to create curiosity. Then through this T-shirt, I think it helps a lot. Like, people, they ask about Uyghurs, they Google the Uyghurs.
Some of his customers already know a lot about the topic. Others are just about to find out.
As an American, I feel a responsibility as a conscientious consumer to understand that the Uyghurs are inextricably connected to American consumership and capitalism, that there are so many companies that have direct or indirect relationships to Uyghur labor through the forced detention and forced labor camps that the Chinese are inflicting on them and have been for so long.
So I'm definitely interested in knowing more about them, and I plan to Google Uyghur later today.
Let's go to Munich now and speak to Zumrutai Arkin, Program Manager of the World Uyghur Congress, which advocates for Uyghur human rights. So good to have you with us. We are just obviously days away from the Winter Games in Beijing, with the eyes of the world focused on China. How much attention do you think will there be on the plight of the Uyghurs?
We certainly hope that there will be enough attention on the human rights atrocities that are occurring in not only East Turkestan, but also in Tibet, Hong Kong, and all across China as well, because this is a unique opportunity when the world's eyes will be focused on China, and we hope that this focus is not only going to be on sports, but also on what's happening behind.
Do you feel that the IOC and elite sport in general are indifferent to the plight of the Uyghurs?
I think that they don't necessarily care enough to act, because we did meet with the IOC on more than one occasion, and we shared our pleas, we shared our concerns about what was happening, in the context of the games, what would be happening and citing very concrete examples such as Uyghur forced labor that might be involved in producing Olympic goods, Olympic uniforms and merchandises, because we know that the IOC has contracted with Chinese groups that are tightly linked to Uyghur forced labor. So when we shared these concerns, there was nothing concrete that they were willing to do to address these human rights issues.
So the IOC was not receptive to some of your criticism. Do you hope that there may be protests at the Games from maybe certain elite athletes competing in the Olympics?
Absolutely. I think it's really up to the athletes to speak up, and we expect them to do it because, yes, there will be consequences, as we have heard directly from a member of the Beijing Organizing Committee 2 weeks ago, basically threatening athletes if they wanted to speak up on certain issues. But we hope that athletes who will be the most protected and privileged groups of individuals at these games will use their platform to speak up. And of course, we know that because of Rule 50, they're not able to speak up on the podium, but we hope that they can use opportunities during press conferences and other occasions to bring up these issues.
A number of countries, as you know, high-profile countries, have announced diplomatic boycotts ahead of the Games. Are you encouraged by that? Does it make any difference?
It is very encouraging to see because it sends a very clear and strong message to Beijing that the international community will not simply watch by when China is committing a genocide and at the same time given this prestigious platform to host the Games. So it sends a very clear message to Beijing, and we believe that Beijing is feeling that pressure. Otherwise, they wouldn't be harassing activists and threatening athletes from speaking up. And another thing that is quite important to highlight is that it gives our community hope and encouragement as well.
Hope and encouragement, but in the meantime, the Chinese leadership is not budging when it comes to its Uyghur policies. Are these limited boycotts emboldening, in a certain sense, the Chinese president to continue on this path?
I think this is something that's very difficult to tell just because of the extremely difficulty to access to any kind of information of what's happening inside. We've lost contact with our family members. Pretty much every single Uyghur living in exile doesn't have contact. So it's in that situation, it's very difficult to see if these policies are being softened or worsened. But we do know that in the recent years, the human rights situation has deteriorated quite significantly. We're talking about a genocide, and I think the only way to address this is via multilateral action. If enough countries are pressuring China, because we know and we've seen that China does care about its international reputation and credibility, despite claiming otherwise.
Zumrutai Arkin is Program Manager of the World Uyghur Congress, which advocates for Uyghur human rights. Thank you very much for coming on and talking to us.
Thanks for having me.